So what we're talking about is doing observation in Scripture as part of your Bible study. When you're actually trying to do an in-depth study on some topic or character or aspect of the Bible, how to do it. And the first step is to do observation and see what is happening in that specific passage without trying to do any interpretation on it. What we're talking about is the inductive Bible study method, where you observe a situation, try to understand what's happening, and then from that situation you try and derive general principles to live by. So you start by observing, and then deriving those general principles is what we call interpretation, which is the next step. So what we were doing last week, and we're going to continue with this week, is doing some practice observation. So first, let me ask this question. The things we observed last week, one of them was Jesus calming the sea, right? Let me ask you, if I asked you to tell me the story of Jesus crossing the Sea of Galilee, do you think you could do it? No. At this point?
Maybe.
Maybe? If I had asked you that last week, do you think you could have done it? No. So would you like to try?
Sure. So Jesus and the disciples were on land somewhere, and someone said, "Hey, let's go over there, across water." And so they did. And Jesus, the really stormy and water and frightening, and Jesus was asleep, and one of them woke him up. They're like, "Dude, aren't you gonna do something?" And he says, "You have such faith, when you calm the seas and everything."
Yep. So that's not bad. But the point is that that's a very common Bible story, right?
I was the one who raised it.
You did fine.
I would have given you an A.
Oh, no, I'm not complaining at all. That was great.
I like the part where we're going, "Oh, dude!" It made the whole story.
Well, the point is that that's a common Bible story. You've probably heard it in church a dozen times, but you didn't remember it. But now that you sat there and carefully did...
Oh, I could have gone through all those, but you made me nervous.
No, you did fine. I was looking more for in your own words.
Oh.
So the thing is that now that you've sat there and carefully observed that passage, you remember it.
Yes.
So next time somebody talks about Jesus calming the sea, you're going to know exactly what they're talking about. And you're not going to have to try and remember, okay, what was that story? And how did it happen? What events occurred in what order? You've got it now. And that's a good thing. You can do the same thing with Jacob wrestling with God. Anybody remember that story?
Jacob wrestling with God.
You weren't here last week. That's right. Yeah. So
You want me to try?
you don't have to. I'm just saying.
I remember the story.
That's what he's asking.
Yeah. But that's the thing, is we remember the story now. If you didn't remember it before, you do now, because we spent time looking at each characteristic of the story. So it's really good. It really gets the Bible into your mind where you don't forget it easily. So let's go ahead and move on to our next example, which is James 3. Do you have your Bible, Caleb? It's actually it's after Hebrews. It's after Hebrews.
Have we not sung the
Romans,
Bible
Hebrews.
song enough?
James what?
3. It's page 1507 in these ESVs. All right. So specifically, we'll be looking at verses 1 through 10. So anybody want to read those for us? And we'll all read along. Verses 1 through 10. Read 1 through 10.
I will.
Okay.
1 through 10?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's almost.
Yeah, just read the whole paragraph.
Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with great strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder, whenever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire! And the tongue is a fire, world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. It is restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both flesh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water.
Okay, so this is a fairly long section. It's longer than the ones we've looked at before. So a very useful tip in doing observations on this is do observations by paragraph. Because paragraphs, from English class, they break up ideas, right? So a paragraph should contain a distinct idea. Keep in mind, however, the original Greek and Hebrew did not have paragraphs. They didn't have periods, they didn't have dashes, they didn't have lowercase letters, they didn't have spaces. All of their text was written as capital letters in one long string with no division between anything. Ancient Hebrew didn't even have vowels written in their text. You had to insert the vowels as you read them. So these paragraphs were added later. They were not in the original text. And sometimes they're in the wrong place, right? So although they are very useful and can really help you, if you see two paragraphs that maybe should have been together, or two sentences that maybe should have been one sentence, or one sentence that should have been two, keep that in mind. That being said, the people who did put this stuff in there were very, very smart and spent a lot of time working on it and did a really good job. So don't assume every verse is like that. Just keep in mind. So we'll go ahead and start with the first paragraph. What do we observe about the first paragraph? It starts with a warning, right? It says, not everyone should be teachers. And why does it say that? Right. Teachers are judged more harshly.
It also tells us that all of us are going to stumble, which means your teachers are going to stumble. And when they do stumble, you're going to be judged strictly.
Don't interpret. This is observation.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Easy trap to fall into. So let's go through this a little more systematically. And if you'll look at the first page of your handouts, there are some of those example questions. So first question, who is saying this? James. That's easy. It says it's there in the book. And if you read James 1, chapter 1, verse 1, it says, James, a servant of God, of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 disciples. It's right there. James says, I am James. This is my letter. I am writing it to you. So it's right there in the beginning. Makes it real easy. So the question here, though, who is he speaking to?
Would you have a handout, please?
Oh,
With
sorry.
this review.
The church. Speaking to Jews of the dispersion.
Okay. So that again is also identified in verse 1, to the 12 tribes in dispersion. So he's basically speaking to any Jew who will listen. Right? So what is he talking about specifically? The tongue. He's also talking a little bit about teaching. Right? Because I know a little that thing about teaching, and it goes on to elaborate how that's about tongue. That's good. So this is a teaching passage. The passages we looked at before were narratives, right? They were stories. This is a teaching passage. So asking who else was watching and who else is involved, or who else is watching, is really not a real great question. Because it's, I mean, what? Who was sitting there watching James write the letter? Who was sitting there watching the church read the letter? It's not a real useful question in this specific case. But who else was involved in this? You know, it doesn't really say, does it? There isn't really anyone else involved. So again, because it's a teaching passage, the what questions are a little bit hard. What happened? Well, nothing happened. James wrote a letter. He sent it to the churches, right?
But what about the illustrations and stuff? Can they be the what?
We'll get into illustrations later. But what ideas were expressed? There's a good question. We've already talked about a couple of them. Don't everyone be teachers. And second, all teachers stumble. There's another idea. The tongue can't be tamed, or at least that if a man can tame the tongue, he's tamed his entire self. Yeah. So, question: where did this happen? Probably everywhere the Greeks or the Jews were dispersed, right? Let's see. When did this take place?
At the time of the dispersion.
So we could look in that Bible handbook again and find the dates, but if memory serves, it's somewhere after the death of Christ, so after 30 AD, before 70 AD. So roughly in those 40 years. And I know it's after Christ died because, well, all the epistles, everything in the New Testament was written after Christ died. And I know it was before 70 AD because I remember that all the books except for Revelation were before 70 AD. And that was a really important milestone in the history of Christianity or Judaism because that's when the temple was destroyed. And it's believed that these books were written before that because they never mentioned the destruction of the temple, and that would have been such a key figure in their mind at the time. It would have been kind of like being around, writing a letter in 2000, writing something doctrinal in 2002 and not mentioning Twin Towers. It was significant. So we already talked about what year, what season, hard to say, doesn't really tell us, right? What time of day? Don't know, probably not real important either. What other events were taking place? Well, obviously the Jews had been dispersed, so there was something happening, some persecution. Right? And again, if we looked in that handbook, we could probably find what caused them to be dispersed and some of that kind of information. Why did it happen? Or a better question is, why did James write this letter? Yeah, it kind of tells you right there. He's writing, it's a warning, right? He's warning them. That's what he's doing. And you can kind of say the same thing. What is the purpose? His purpose is to warn them. Again, not all these questions are relevant to every single passage. And how are these things accomplished? You wrote it there. It's really actually very simple. Until you get into some of the more advanced things, right? So we haven't gotten into these yet. But if I were to say, let's look at we're going to talk about in a little bit, maybe next week, about the illustrations that we use. And there are actually quite a few illustrations in here, right? So what illustrations are there?
Big trees, horses and bits,
Fire.
salt,
And
fish,
ships.
water.
Right, so there's actually a lot of analogies. And what are all of these analogies trying to say? What is he doing by using these analogies?
Painting pictures.
Painting pictures. Right. He's trying to make it easy for them to understand, giving them something they can actually imagine and think about. So, if you ask yourself, how does this analogy paint the picture? How does it paint the picture that the tongue is like a small fire set ablaze in the forest? So can you imagine that scenario and then compare it to something in real life where someone said something that caused something like a fire to happen? Just look at any of Trump's tweets. And you got workplace stuff. Oh my goodness, company politics. Yeah. All kinds of options, right? You can really think about that. Or what about the one about the rudder, right? That was one where you actually are demonstrating some measure of control, right? You're saying that the tongue has some measure of control. And if you can control the tongue, like the captain, you have some control, right? So can you imagine a scenario in your life where you chose your words carefully enough to improve the result? Right? So these analogies are painting those kinds of pictures. And if you can identify, all right, he's using this example of just a complete wildfire, someone who's not controlling their tongue at all, just causing massive destruction. And then he's got this other example. Here's one where a large thing, during the course of your whole life, driven by a tiny rudder. And it goes where the pilot directs. And who would be the pilot in the situation of the tongue? Ideally, yes, but no, it's you are. So, making note of those things. So you want to write down how those illustrations clarify things. And we'll come back to illustrations, discuss them some more. But there's just great illustrations in this one. I wanted to bring it up now. And the other thing, like you can pay attention to other things like what proportion of time did James spend on this in his letter? If you just flip back through here, there's a section on testing in faith, acts, hearing and doing, sin and partiality. There's a big thing in here about faith tied to works, right? So that's a pretty big section. And then you can see the section on taming the tongue. And then it goes on to these other sections, patience and suffering and all this stuff. You see that he spends actually, the tongue is actually the second largest section in the book. It's still half the size of the faith and works section, but it's still the second largest section in the book. So it's probably important, right? And you put extra time into it. We can come back to some of these other ones later, but just a good opportunity to show, especially in teaching, those more advanced observation techniques are really useful. So how about the second paragraph? I think we already kind of covered it. There's a section there, no human being can tame the tongue. It is restless evil, full of deadly poison. That paints a pretty vivid picture. Another illustration there. He actually spends quite a bit of time explaining exactly how evil the tongue is. That second paragraph is almost all about how terrible the tongue is and how you can tell a person by their words. Anyone got any observations on that passage they want to bring up? I think we pretty well dissected it. So let's move on, do one more example, and then we'll move on to from these questions to more advanced observation techniques. Now, when I say more advanced, don't think they replace these questions. These questions are critical. Ask these questions of every passage you read, and then go on to the advanced stuff to add to it. Don't replace this. But anyway, the last one we're going to look at, Psalms chapter 1. Page 643 if you've got the ESV Bible. All right, someone want to read that first chapter for us? All right, go for it.
Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night.
Keep going, the whole chapter.
He is like a tree planted by streams of water, and yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but are like chaff that the wind drives away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of righteousness. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish.
Okay. Good. So, we'll go ahead and go through our questions. Who wrote this?
David and others, it says.
Yeah. I mean, Psalms is actually 5 different books, right? If you notice at the top there, it says this is book 1, so it's actually 5 books of Psalms. In our canon, we concatenate them all together. But yeah, a lot of them were contributed by David, especially the earlier ones. The later ones tend to involve other people. This one, probably David. So, he's the narrator, he's the one speaking. Who is being talked about?
A wicked man and a blessed man.
Right. It's a compare and contrast situation, which compare and contrast is actually one of the things we're going to cover in a little bit. So that's important. What they're doing here is they've got this man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked nor stands in the way of sinners. He is the delight of the Lord. And then right there in verse 5, it starts talking about the wicked. Therefore is another word we're going to be talking about later. Because it says, therefore says, take everything that I've already said and now draw this conclusion from it. It's an important word. It says, therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. So it's comparing and contrasting the wicked and righteous. So there are two people here. They're not literal people, but they are two. Yeah. They're talking about a person as if he is the every man or every person or every woman, however you want to refer to them. So who else is watching? What is Psalms? First off, and what is the book of Psalms? It's a song book. It's like it's like a hymnal in a church, right? This was Old Testament hymnal. So really, there wasn't a lot of people watching. And maybe you could think of them in their temples and stuff singing this, and anybody walking by outside would have seen or watched them sing these songs and heard these words. And who else is involved? Maybe not the most useful question in this case, but you can think, well, there's people playing the music, there's a congregation singing.
Who's the heart of David as he's writing it?
Yep.
Which is all supposition, because Scripture does not say that. You just kind of have to draw conclusions.
Say what?
It's supposition, because we're just drawing conclusions of what could be, but Scripture does
Which
not.
Which one is the supposition? Which one is the supposition?
I'm trying to guess who else was hearing it, who else was watching it, things like that.
Yeah, but it's a pretty safe supposition. We're not trying to say Jim was listening to the song, and when Jim heard the song, he immediately changed his life. No, we're saying there was a congregation of people singing. Probably people heard it when they walked by. It's a very safe supposition. But he's right. It is. The Bible doesn't say. For all we know, they wrote this song. You're like, oh man, that's the great lyrics, but the rhythm is just way off. We can never sing that. Or, it's in a key that my voice just won't reach. We're just going to forget it. So maybe they never sang it. It seems very unlikely. If that was true, I doubt it would have ended up in the book of Psalms.
Yeah, and some of them say right out, these are notes for the choir master. This is a note for, or play this with the lyre, whatever.
So, okay. So what happened? Again, it's a song. There's not really a what. You can look at, though, this every man that's in this passage. What is happening to him? So what is happening in either the first 4 verses? It's the every righteous man, and in the last 2 verses, it's the every wicked man. So what is happening to those 2 people in these passages?
One is delighting in God's law.
And he's... What else? The righteous man is intentionally avoiding the counsel of the wicked and intentionally avoiding the company of sinners. Right? So what ideas were expressed? Yep. What was the result?
The less prosperous and the wicked
perish. Yeah. Yep.
Glorify God.
That's interpretation. We're doing observation.
I keep doing this and
Yeah, talk louder.
So, where did this happen? Yeah, the temples. Ancient Israel is probably another way to look at it. No, the temples is good. It's definitely good. That's where this was probably most often used. But really, all of Israel. How many of us who grew up listening to Amazing Grace still don't have those lyrics in our head from time to time? It's really everywhere, right? So, when does anyone know when this was written?
The Psalms, it was written by David,
BC? Yeah. Again, that's not a question we can directly answer from the scriptures. Get yourself a Bible handbook. In fact, let's go ahead and have Kaylee look it up for us. Bible handbook. This is the new Unger's Bible handbook. It gives a nice little description of all the different books. And you can flip through it, and it's organized in the same order as the Bible, so you can flip through it. There's Ruth, and Samuel and Chronicles, and it'll give you a nice little description of it. And I just happened to flip straight to Psalms, so see if you can find the date in there for us. While she's doing that, we won't all stare and make her feel awkward.
Good for the date, then. That's
I said we're not going to stare at her and make her feel
Oh.
awkward. We'll move on to another question. So, well, we're trying to find the year.
Oh, so this is like the whole book.
Yeah. She hasn't seen this.
Oh yeah, that's a great book. That class we did on the Bible survey class. That's the Bible survey class right there.
And Pastor cheated and walked out into the hall and looked on that.
Yeah, we have that.
He's not cheating. He's using the resources.
He's using resources. We've got a timeline posted on the wall back there.
She's just mad because she didn't think of it.
Can I use it?
Yeah, let's try the handbook. The handbook is really a useful tool. It'll probably be mentioned in the beginning section here. Yeah, somewhere in this first section. Because what they get into next is like an outline of the book. And
So scan the first. So I'm just looking for timeline.
for a date, yeah. Alright, so I was just looking for that. Next question. What other relevant events were taking place? It's hard to say exactly when this was written, but most of David's life is pretty well chronicled in the Bible. Samuel and Kings and Chronicles all talk about David. So chances are he wrote this book in some period of his life that was chronicled. We just don't know which one. It'd be pretty cool to know. See if what was happening in his life influenced this. Who knows? Maybe he wrote this while he was playing his harp for Saul. Maybe this was the day after Saul threw that spear at him. We don't know that. Don't go to your pastor and say, "Hey, this guy at church the other day said that this was after David got the spear thrown at him." I didn't say that. Just it'd be cool to know. We don't know, sadly. Anyway, did you find it, Katie? Okay. If you can't find it soon, you can go use the timeline in the hall if you like. All right. So next question. Why did it happen? Thoughts? You know why it happened?
Between 1100 BC and what that.
Okay. If you get more Bible study resources, they have all kinds of books on timelines and charts.
That one, if you look up what year she found out about David, you'll find out what's going on around the world at the same time.
So when you're asking that question, what else, other events were taking place, that'd be a good one. They might not all directly influence the authorship of whatever you're reading. Like, I doubt David was influenced by whatever was happening in ancient China. So it's kind of cool to see what else was happening. Because there were a lot of those people that we hear their names, but we don't really know much, don't think about them a lot, that were alive in Jesus' time. Like, especially like Far Eastern philosophers were alive in Jesus' time. It is really interesting stuff.
Or during the time of Moses with the Egyptians, what's going on with the Egyptian people while he's living there. And you know, I've been coming from that, those kind of sources.
So we're still asking the question, why was Why did this happen? Why did David write this? Honestly, it doesn't say. We know David was an artist. He played songs and wrote songs, apparently. That might be the only reason he needed.
We could reflect on reasons why we would write a song. What would motivate us or move us to write something?
That's kind of where I was going. David was an artist. He had it in him. It's not like they had TV to distract them.
He was an artist. Like,
David? Wait, he played the harp?
or like,
No, like a music artist. He played the harp. Obviously, he wrote songs. Let's see. So the how questions. Again, it's kind of a hard one. You could take those how questions and bring them back to things we've already seen, like how was the righteous man blessed? He was blessed because he intentionally avoided the wicked and the scoffers and that kind of thing. And again, we have an illustration here. So let me ask this question I asked in the last one. How does that illustration clarify what's happening? What idea David is trying to get across?
And it's just drinking in God's law, just filling himself like a tree by a stream of water. Because you're talking about the desert, you're talking about a tree. Aren't you in Psalms 1?
Yeah, am
I in the wrong verse?
No, you're in the right verse. I'm just not quite sure I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think of it like God is sustaining him, this righteous man, right?
Yeah, it says, but his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water that yields its fruit in its season, and its leaf does not wither. Why is that? Because he's drinking in God's.
It's sustaining him through
right.
hot summer or hot desert conditions, right? So are we good with all this? Anyone else got any observations they want to add? Does anyone have a specific piece of scripture that they think would be just fun to do some observations on? Or do you want to move on to the next subject?
you say that you any part of the Bible?
Mhm.
Which is
Any part of the Bible.
the beginning of Genesis.
You want to do the beginning of Genesis?
Yes.
All right, let's see. Which verses specifically? We've only got 5 minutes left, so that's why I was offering to do that instead of moving on. We don't have a lot of time for the next subject. Noah's Ark. All right, Katie, which verses? Yeah, but I need to stop you.
No, okay.
That's 1 through 5.
Verses 1 through 5. All right. Okay, since it was your idea, why don't you go and read it for us?
What?
It was your idea.
Okay.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without from the void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness.
Just go ahead and finish. Yeah, sorry, keep going. One more verse.
God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there were evening, and there was morning the first day.
All right. So we'll do our questions. Who wrote this?
No.
David, go for it. Moses. Okay. Moses wrote the Pentateuch, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. All Moses. So he's the narrator. He's the one speaking. Who is being spoken about? God. We're talking about God. Who else is watching? Nobody. Who else is involved?
Just Jesus.
Maybe the angels. Jesus.
Does Satan count? Was he here then?
I don't know. I've never really understood. Is Satan and the angels and the demons there when Earth is there, or did it happen before or after? Was there time that it mattered whether it was before or after? You're getting some really confusing metaphysics.
Well, I heard Satan was an angel, and then he turned into the devil.
Yes.
And so his angels were there with him, I guess.
I don't think it's important.
It's not good. Maybe the angels were there, maybe they weren't. The Bible doesn't say. If you could find some place where it would say, that's great. I don't know off the top of my head. It doesn't say it here. So we're just going to say there wasn't. So what happened?
God created
And the earth. And he did something else.
Created animals.
No,
That's later.
this is one of your five. Time. Darkness.
Created a new.
He separated the darkness and the light. And we have the first day. See what ideas were expressed? That God created the heavens and the earth. And, the idea is basically right there. There isn't because this is a narrative, there isn't some specific idea that you can distill out of it. The idea is exactly what it says. Teaching passages are good for what idea was expressed. Narratives are not quite geared that way. What was the result? There was a formless earth covered in water. There was day, there was night. Where did it happen?
Space.
It happened on Earth, right? Space. That's a good. It happened everywhere because before that there was nowhere. But yeah, everywhere. It happened everywhere. It happened on Earth. It happened in space. Good passage, Katie. This is fun. Yes. When did it happen?
In the beginning.
In the beginning. Yeah, that's actually probably the most specific you can get. It happened in the beginning. You could try and put a year on it. A lot of conservative Christian young Earth creationists.
Did you just say 0 or 1?
No, because it's BC. At AD, they start counting forward, and anything older than 1 AD is BC, and they count backward.
Yeah.
So, because of the genealogies in the Bible, people with a lot of time on their hands to study the Bible have counted the genealogies backward and dated the earth somewhere around 6,000 years old. So this would have been roughly 4,000 something BC. Of course, don't quote me on that. A lot of people agree that that's a good estimate, but we don't know for sure.
Topic on its own.
Yeah.
Because if it was 7 days and 1,000 years since the day of God.
Well, that's 7 days. It's actually an interesting point. They say that there are 3 ways that the Israelites would specify a literal day as opposed to like saying back in the day of kings and vassals and stuff versus a day. And what they said was that there's 3 ways. One is they use the definite article. The definite article in English, we only have one, is the word the. So in verse 5, the first day. Second, they use a number, such as first. The first day, so it's twice there. The third way they did it was by specifying a time span, such as there was evening and there was morning, the first day. So it's actually stated 3 different ways that this is a literal day. So, anyway, beyond observation. That's getting into interpretation and grammatical structure of ancient Hebrew. But since it was this,
That's for next week.
so moving quickly, we can skip the rest of the wing questions that took place in the beginning. Why did it happen?
Because God showed it.
Yep. Why did you? Yep. You could go a little bit further. Why did God want to create the earth?
Because he was lonely.
He wanted people to worship Him. Yes. People to love Him and worship Him. Let's see. And how were these things accomplished? Sheer will. With His voice, He said it and it happened. So.
Power of God.
And how effectively were these things accomplished?
To perfection.
Yes. You don't see God said, "Let there be light," and then all the workers started installing 1,001 light bulbs, and OSHA came in and did an inspection. And
So they had to redo it.
you don't see, yeah, it happened perfectly. Very good. All right, we'll go ahead and stop there. Next week, we'll get into some of the, like I said, the more advanced topics. So we'll get into things like the form of a passage, observing keywords, comparison and contrast, dealing with Old Testament references and New Testament books, observing proportion, repetition, progression of ideas, verbs, illustrations, explanations, and connected words. So there really is a lot more we could cover in observation. But these are the most important things. These are kind of the fundamentals. So we'll be able to move through them a lot faster now. But as for this week, do your week 2 memory verses from...
Week 1 for some of us.
Yes, yeah, for the topical memory system. Nathan and Blade, if you want those. The week 1 verses are 2 Corinthians 5:17. And Galatians 2:20.
You could have a memory system app.
2 Corinthians 5:17. Yeah, and topical memory system isn't available by app if you want. It's probably the worst user interface I've ever seen in an app. But you know, you can do it on your phone rather than having to order the book and deal with the cards. And okay, so week 1 verses 2 Corinthians 5:17 and Galatians 2:20. And then the week 2 verses, the week that we're going to start working on here for those of us who've been here for this whole thing, Romans 12:1 and John 14:21. All right, so yeah, work on your memory verses, do your daily quiet time, bring something to share. Try and find an opportunity to do some observation, pick a passage. I'm going to be honest with you, Proverbs is not a good passage, or not a good book to be doing observations in because there is no context. Every proverb is
I
atomic.
think I'll probably start in the New Testament. I'm a lot of better storytelling.
And if you can, take notes in the church this week. No, Charlotte's not real cooperative. And that's it. Well, thanks for coming. I'll see you all next week.